We all know the story. Man gets mauled by bear. Man crawls 200 miles for revenge. Leonardo DiCaprio finally gets his Oscar. But what if I told you the bear attack was actually one of the less incredible things that happened to Hugh Glass? What if the real man survived so many near-death experiences that Hollywood actually toned down his story? The truth is, before Hugh Glass ever encountered that famous grizzly, he'd already escaped pirates, survived ritualistic torture, and lived as an adopted member of a Native American tribe. And after the bear, his adventures were just getting started. The early 1800s American frontier was no place for the faint of heart. This was uncharted wilderness where survival meant navigating a complex web of warring tribes, fierce predators, and brutal weather with nothing but your wits and whatever you could carry on your back. Unfortunately, most frontier tales from this era are forgotten to history. But Hugh Glass, his legend has endured for 200 years because his life wasn't just about one particular grisly story. It was about surviving the unsurvivable, not just once, but over and over again. Let's dive into the truly wild life of the real Hugh Glass, the parts they didn't show you on the big screen. Before Glass ever set foot in the American wilderness, he was already living a life straight out of an adventure novel. Around 1816, Glass was working as a sailor when his ship was captured by pirates. And not just any pirates. His captors sailed under Jean Lafitte, one of history's most notorious buccaneers, who'd recently helped Andrew Jackson win the Battle of New Orleans. The pirates gave Glass a simple choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Join them or die. He chose life as a pirate. For nearly a year, Glass sailed under the Skull and Crossbones, raiding ships in the Gulf of Mexico. But something happened during that year, something Glass never talked much about. His few confessions to fellow trappers years later hint at barbarous acts that haunted him. What exactly did Glass do during his time with Lafitte? This part of his story remains shrouded in mystery. What we do know is that Glass eventually learned he and another crewmate were scheduled for execution the next day. Lafitte wasn't known for tolerating weakness or dissent, so Glass and his companion did something almost suicidal. They jumped ship in the middle of the night and swam miles to shore near present-day Galveston, Texas. Think about what that means, swimming for hours in shark-infested waters, fighting currents and exhaustion, with nothing but the clothes on their backs, and freedom as their only motivation. Against all odds, they made it to shore alive. But as they'd soon discover, the Texas coast in the 1810s wasn't exactly a safe haven. After surviving at sea, Glass and his companion now faced starvation in an unfamiliar landscape. They trekked inland, navigating by stars, desperately seeking civilization. Here's something most people don't realize about survival. It's rarely one big challenge, but rather a cascade of problems. You solve one crisis, only to face another. For Glass, escaping pirates was just the beginning. After weeks of barely surviving off the land, Glass and his companion were discovered by a band of Pawnee Native Americans. This wasn't a friendly encounter. The Pawnee took them captive and brought them back to their village. What happened next would break most men forever. The Pawnee practiced ritual sacrifice. Glass was forced to watch as his companion, the only person who shared his pirate ordeal, was tied to a stake, pierced with burning pine slivers, and slowly burned alive. Glass knew he was next. He could see the preparations being made. Death seemed certain. But somehow Glass made a connection that saved his life. Having sailed with pirates, he carried something rare and valuable: cinnabar, a mineral prized for making red war paint. He presented it to the chief as a gift. The chief was impressed not just by the gift, but by Glass's composure in the face of certain death. Instead of killing him, the chief adopted Glass into the tribe. For the next 4 years, Hugh Glass lived as a Pawnee. He took a Native American wife, learned their language, and absorbed crucial survival skills that would later save his life again and again. He learned which plants were edible and which were poisonous. He discovered how to navigate vast territories without maps. He mastered tracking animals, reading weather patterns, and treating wounds with natural medicine. Glass even fought alongside the Pawnee in tribal warfare, earning respect as a warrior. This wasn't just cultural tourism. Glass had fully embraced this new life. In many ways, he became more Pawnee than European. Then in 1821, something changed. Glass accompanied a Pawnee delegation to St. Louis for diplomatic talks with US authorities. While his Pawnee companions returned to their territory, Glass stayed behind, drawn back to the civilized world for reasons he never fully explained. Why would a man who'd integrated so completely into Pawnee life suddenly abandon it? Some historians suggest he was running from something, perhaps a tribal conflict gone wrong. Others believe he was simply restless, a man who could never stay in one place for long. Whatever his reasons, Glass's decision set him on a collision course with the most famous chapter of his life, but also with adventures that history has largely forgotten. In 1823, Glass signed on with General William Ashley's fur trading expedition up the Missouri River. The wilderness was where the money was. Beaver pelts were the 1820s equivalent of gold, used to make fashionable hats in Europe. What Glass couldn't know was that he was walking into a powder keg. The Arikara tribe controlled trade along a crucial section of the Missouri, and they didn't appreciate Ashley trying to bypass their monopoly. On June 2nd, 1823, hundreds of Arikara warriors launched a surprise attack on Ashley's party. In the chaos, Glass took a bullet to the leg. 14 other men died in what would later be called the first major conflict between US forces and Plains Indians. Despite his wound, Glass survived and recovered. It was his first brush with death in the American wilderness, but far from his last. 2 months later came the infamous grizzly attack we all know about. But let's fast forward past that, because Glass's story doesn't end with crawling 200 miles with a broken leg and torn throat. Just months after recovering from the bear attack, Glass was travelling up the Powder River with a small party delivering mail. They reached a point where they could travel faster by water, so they built bullboats, vessels made from buffalo hides stretched over willow frames. As they floated down the river, they spotted a Native American encampment. The leader came out speaking Pawnee, Glass's adopted language, and invited them to come ashore and smoke the peace pipe. Glass, fluent in Pawnee, accepted cautiously. But as they sat in the chief's lodge, Glass noticed something alarming. He overheard warriors speaking Arikara, not Pawnee. This was the same tribe that had attacked them months earlier. He whispered to his companions that they were walking into a trap. When they saw their equipment being quietly removed from their boats, they made a desperate run for it. 2 men were killed instantly. Glass and 2 others managed to flee in different directions. The 2 who escaped together made it to a boat, and eventually to safety, where they reported that Hugh Glass had surely been killed. For the second time in less than a year, Hugh Glass was presumed dead. But Glass wasn't dead. He'd managed to hide among some rocks as the Arikara searched for him. When darkness fell, he assessed his situation. Once again, he found himself alone in the wilderness. This time, at least, he had his knife and flint for making fire. But no rifle, no food, no companions, and hundreds of miles of hostile territory between him and the nearest outpost. For most men, this would be a death sentence. For Hugh Glass, it was business as usual. He oriented himself by the stars and began the long journey back to Fort Kiowa, the same fort he'd crawled to after the bear attack. For weeks he travelled on foot through territory, patrolled by the very warriors who wanted him dead. He survived by applying the skills he'd learned living with the Pawnee, finding edible plants, fashioning basic tools, and staying hidden while moving efficiently through the terrain. When Glass finally stumbled into Fort Kiowa, the men there were stunned. Once again, the man they'd given up for dead had returned from the impossible. Glass continued his life as a trapper for another decade after these ordeals. He developed a reputation as a loner who would venture into uncharted territories that other trappers avoided, returning with furs from places no white man had seen before. His luck finally ran out in 1833. While trapping along the Yellowstone River with 2 companions, they were ambushed by a large party of Arikara warriors. All 3 men were killed. When we map out Hugh Glass's life, we see a man who traversed thousands of miles of untamed wilderness, survived multiple cultural worlds, and cheated death so many times it seemed he had a pact with the Grim Reaper himself. His real legacy isn't just the bear attack that made him famous. It's a hardened wilderness man born of a long-lost era, a man who evaded mortal threats as casually as we scroll social media. Today, a small monument stands near the site of Glass's legendary bear mauling in present-day South Dakota. Tourists stop, take photos and move on, most knowing only the Hollywood version of his story. But the real Hugh Glass, pirate, Pawnee, survivor, defied categorization in his time, just as he defies simple storytelling in ours. Perhaps that's the true lesson of Hugh Glass. Survival isn't just about physical endurance. It's about adaptation, the ability to reinvent yourself, to learn from every environment, and to find a way forward when all paths seem closed. In a world increasingly insulated from danger, Glass reminds us of the raw resilience that lives within us all. Not the Hollywood version, but something far wilder and far more human. If you enjoyed the video, please give a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next story.